You're watching Reality Check. Tonight, a closer look at a question that continues to dominate the public conversation: how Modi won. Even though it's been over 10 days since the verdict, this is a question worth returning to because a verdict of this scale deserves a closer, more nuanced examination. All the more given that new economic data on jobs, on growth, on consumption only confirms what has been known all along, that the economy is sputtering. Now, political partisans on either side would like to believe they have the answers. Critics of the BJP argue that the BJP overcame a faltering economy by turning to polarization. The BJP's supporters rubbish this. They credit the win to the Modi government's amazing track record of governance, which they argue overcame the traditional barriers of identity like caste. But now, with the advantage of evidence, the case for a more layered understanding of the elections has come to the fore, much of it from the CSDS Lok Niti post poll. In news that will gladden the BJP, CSDS finds that despite concerns over rural distress, there's been a sharp increase in the BJP's vote share in rural constituencies of over 7 percentage points compared to 2014. The BJP also has continued to build on its support amongst the poor. In 2019, to quote from Mint, again citing CSDS, the BJP had an almost equivalent vote share amongst the poor, lower and middle class voters in this election. Although amongst upper middle class and rich voters, support for the BJP at 44% still remains much higher. Also, CSDS finds that despite Dalit anger, support amongst the SCs for the BJP, already on the up since 2014, has further increased from 24% in 2014 to 33% in 2019. So does this validate the BJP's argument that they've put an end to identity politics because of a Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas approach? Not quite. The same survey quoted in The Hindu finds this, and I quote, "The BJP's all-time high vote share of 37% has come mostly on the back of an unprecedented Hindu consolidation around the party, as only a small proportion of religious minorities support the BJP. From 36% of all Hindu voters in 2014, the number has jumped to 44% this time. In the face of such a massive consolidation of the majority, the opposition parties stood no chance at all," reports The Hindu. Also, only 8% of Muslim voters nationally ended up voting for the BJP, the same as last time. Christians and Sikhs too largely kept away from the BJP. Alright, so joining us tonight on the debate to now look at these new findings and what they tell us about Mandate 2019. We have with us, of course, Sanjay Kumar, Director CSDS, which continues to put out invaluable data. Gilles Vernier, who's Assistant Professor in Political Science, Ashoka University, heads up the excellent Trivedi Center for Political Data, is with us. Ruhi Tiwari, Associate Editor of The Print, is with us. And Vivek Reddy of the BJP is with us, and Yogendra Yadav is also with us. Okay, Yogendra, so if I can start with you, does this now, with these findings from CSDS, does that help us in any way trying to make sense of this verdict, this paradox that we've been grappling with since it came out? On one hand, you have the economic indicators which are real, these are not manufactured, and on the other hand, you have the BJP making huge gains into those very constituencies which one would have assumed would be affected by all of these factors.
Vasu, I've been saying for the last 1 week that we should be wary of two reactions to this verdict. One is a reaction that this does not represent any mandate at all, that this is because of EVMs, that this is because of the manipulation of state machinery, that this is because of the money resources, etc. Yes. To my mind, that's a wrong interpretation of the verdict. Similarly, we should be careful about the opposite reading, which is that because BJP has won, because it has won in a resounding way, everything that they did in the last 5 years was perfect. That it actually represents a positive mandate on every policy feature. I think we should avoid both these conclusions. We have to arrive at a fairly nuanced and careful conclusion, because if we conclude, like some commentators have, because farmers have voted for BJP, there is no farm crisis.
Yes,
then we should also conclude that because young people have voted for BJP, unemployment doesn't exist in this country. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Swaminathan Iyer, who is a very serious commentator, and I would not see him to be attached or tied to any political party. He has shown independence of judgment over the
Yes.
years, but I am very surprised by what he says, because by that logic, because the youth have voted for the BJP, unemployment doesn't exist in this country, and then we have the data last week confirming
Exactly.
what everyone said suspected, that unemployment is very high. To my mind, the answers lie in the following things. Number one, the voter is not asked to vote on one policy. Farmers of India were not asked to say, do you like agriculture policy of the BJP? They were asked to say, which of the two parties do you like more to represent your general interest? Number two, so it's a question of choice rather than a verdict on one policy.
Right.
Number two, a farmer or youth does not have just one identity. The farmer is not voting as farmer. The farmer who has spent the night guarding against stray cattle and is extremely unhappy with that policy comes out and in the morning votes as an Indian national who is very worried about national security. So a farmer has multiple identity. He or she could vote as caste, in religion, on national security or on farming. It so happens that farming was not on top of their priority. That is important and people like me should worry about it. But we cannot therefore conclude that all was well with agriculture policy. And finally, to my mind, the real indicators that are coming cannot be negated by popular perception. Perception sometimes gets it right, sometimes gets it wrong. So let's keep these two things separate. And as I keep saying, let us learn from cricket commentary. In no cricket commentary, at the end of, if a team wins by one innings, you do not say its captain was good, its bowling was good, its fielding was good, its batting was good, and everything was good. No, that's a very bad commentary. I think we should be careful, nuanced. We should understand what worked and what did not work.
Absolutely. No, I can't agree with you more. That's what I said in my introduction, that you have to go beyond these false binaries that it was only Vikas or it was only polarization. Every election is a complex sum of many moving parts, and many of these things can come together and give you a verdict like this. But Sanjay Kumar, to you, I mean, the same question as Yogendra was saying, you have to be more nuanced about it. Your data actually is bringing in that nuance. It's suggesting that on one hand, the poor are voting in greater numbers, rural voters are voting in greater numbers, SC communities are voting in greater numbers. So in some sense, the traditional barriers of identity are being broken. But then on the other hand, you also have this very sharp polarization between Hindus and minorities.
See, Professor Yadav has already summed up how to interpret this data, how to interpret this mandate. But if I want to look at my own data and try and give a meaning to this, yes, I would agree, and I have been saying this on different platforms, that with this big victory of BJP, we should not conclude that everything was fine. This is not a kind of endorsement of what BJP government did during last 5 years. The farmer crisis did exist, does exist on the ground. There is unemployment on the ground. It is not only coming out from the data which is reported in these days in the newspaper, in the past as well. We have been asking questions in our survey, and we got the sense that there is a serious problem of unemployment at the ground.
Right.
But why still people have voted in favor of Modi or BJP? I think I get a clear answer, because this is a vote of hope, a large vote of hope. Prime Minister Modi was standing between this problem on one side and the opposition on the other side. The opposition parties wanted to pick this as an issue. They wanted to convince the voter that this is the problem which is lying on the ground. But Prime Minister Modi's stature, his own credibility was so high, he did not allow the two conversation to take place. This conversation never took place on the ground.
But Sanjay Kumar, I want to ask you, while I agree with you that there would obviously be an element of hope, when you get 303 seats, that's something which even goes beyond that. Again, given the fact that you are now defending a very patchy economic record. So this is something I've asked you before, that did, for example, the surgical strikes perhaps provide that extra boost? And did that help overcome some of these cracks and fissures?
See, if we try and get slices of 37% vote, 38% vote BJP got, I think the biggest slice would be of a vote for hope, a vote for aspiration. People have a huge faith in Prime Minister Modi, and they think all their anxieties, all their aspiration can be fulfilled only by Prime Minister Modi. So the biggest chunk of this 37% vote is of that hope. There are other slices. One slice is also of the developmental or the welfare scheme.
Yes.
I won't say that these welfare scheme didn't work at all for the government. It did give them some vote.
Sure.
Similarly, the question which you have posed, Balakot, Pulwama, did that also add to BJP's popularity or BJP's vote share? It did add to BJP's vote share. If I have to quantify, I would say maybe 3%, 3.5%, 4%. Difficult to quantify, but maybe 3% I would add. This is the vote of Balakot across the country, largely in the Hindi heartland, and that is why we saw BJP's vote share going up in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh and many other states.
3-4% is actually, that's quite a lot, Ruhi Tiwari. But I mean, interesting that you have this situation, and I think we all came across it when we traveled on the ground, where you have people who are standing in the midst of fairly abject distress, whether it's joblessness, whether it's rural distress, admitting that they have a problem, they have no jobs, but still saying they'll vote for Modi.
Right.
And that paradox is now, we're now seeing it in the data.
Sure. See, it was a cocktail of factors that came together to bring the kind of mandate that the government or that the BJP managed. But data tells us there's been unemployment, there is rising unemployment. Anecdotally also we know there is unemployment. We do know there was farmer crisis. Clearly, none of these issues angered the voter enough to not vote for the BJP. So it's really about what was the dominant theme and what was priority for the voter. And as I said, a combination of factors, whether it was seeing Mr. Modi as this decisive, strong leader who can protect you and who can take the country forward, or whether it was a degree of polarization, communal polarization, or it was the welfare schemes that were introduced by the last government, by the BJP government. All of it together seemed to have overshadowed any kind of anger or disappointment that may have existed on the economic front, which, as you rightly pointed out, the economic record was patchy, the last government.
Gilles, I'll come to you before I go to Vivek. Again, Gilles, what continues to baffle me is that all of these things that we talk about, Mr. Modi's own, powerful campaigning style, a weak opposition, the fact that you also have delivered to some extent, all of that you would have thought would have ensured a return, a comfortable return, but not this kind of massive pro-incumbency landslide. That's something which still is mystifying, right? Are you seeing any clues in all the evidence that's coming out, or are you still scratching your head?
Well, I'm still scratching my head. But well, first of all, Yogendraji said it, more clearly and more, intelligently than I could, and I completely agree with what he said. I think we have to factor in also the electoral machine of the BJP and the organizational strength. I'm not one of those who says that elections are only based on only one on the basis of money, muscle, and organizations, but they do play a considerable role. If you take two states as an example, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, in one state the BJP actually runs a strong campaign and has an organization, builds up, and they actually progress in terms of vote share.
Yes.
They even win strongholds of the TRS.
Yes.
In Andhra Pradesh, they remain at 2%. That basically shows you that where the Modi brand is not supported by ground organization, it's not enough to lift the BJP. The two have to go together. We need to factor in also, the weakness of the Congress, the inability, the failure at representing an alternative, and the fact that the BJP since 2014 has been substituting itself to the Congress as the main opposition in a large number of states where it was not present before. So the BJP has been able to fill in voids there, and you can look at the spaces where.
Right.
So you have to.
Yeah.
Now, on the question of, on the what basis people vote, I think we have to eat the humble pie and admit that, we do not have a theory of voting. We do not have an effective theory that explains the determinants of electoral behavior in India. For one, there's a lack of data, and second, most of the intellectual framework that we have used
Yes.
let's say since the 90s,
Yeah.
seems not to apply entirely anymore.
Okay, so these are all, yeah. So that's another layer of scholarship, perhaps, and research that needs to be opened up. Vivek Reddy, coming to you. I mean, again, taking nothing away from Mr. Modi's victory, and also nothing away from the fact that now these huge sections of India that were traditionally not BJP voters are now coming towards you. As we mentioned, the poor, the rural, those at the bottom end of the caste spectrum. But the fact is that none of that takes away from the fact that the economy was not in good shape. In fact, the indicators were that it was sputtering right through this campaign period. And now the growth numbers are telling you that, the job numbers are telling you that. Let's put that graphic up on screen actually, which has the sort of chronicle of all the various economic indicators. The consumer indices are all down. What does that tell you, Vivek Reddy? Do you concede that, of course, this was partly to do with the government schemes and partly to do with your great political machinery, but partly also factors that seem to override a very patchy economic record, which now you have to now grapple with?
Vasu, I think yes. Vasu, I think a number of factors led to this massive mandate of the people. Unless and until these factors operated, I don't think we would have been able to capture this amount of the support of the electorate. Some of the factors that I can highlight, which perhaps was overshadowed all other factors, whatever you mentioned and other factors, are some of the factors are: one, the leadership; second, the organizational strength of BJP;
We mentioned those.
third, the fact that yes.
But
and
how do you account?
Third is that
How do
there
you
was
account? No, my question
there was
is,
no competent opposition.
yes, but how do you account for the fact that, Vivek,
Yes.
take all that into account, but despite, as we're saying, serious problems
Yes.
on the economic front under your government's watch, how do you think
Yes.
people didn't factor those in?
Well, I think yes,
Because
I think
those are
also
real.
economically. If you took, I agree, whatever you're saying, I agree that they were real, that there were these statistics there. But the fact is that Modi came out as a person who could sort this out, who could take these challenges. If you look at the past 5 years and the track record of the past 5 years, Mr. Modi took this economy from the world's 9th largest to the 6th largest, made it the fastest growing economy in the world. I think people had that trust. Now, every republic, every state, Vasu, has challenges before it, has problems before it. The fact that Modi was the person
But
to
you
be
know, on
trusted
GDP
to take it on the road ahead,
Yeah.
I
But you
think
know,
that is what the people ultimately thought. The earnestness was there. He
But
had reached out to the
earnestness-
hearts of the people, and he was the most competent to address these challenges.
But if you look at, when you talk about growth, actually there's a big question mark over growth numbers, number one. But even if you leave that aside, look at this.
Yes.
Unemployment highest in 45 years, agricultural growth has dipped to 2.9%, agricultural income growth lowest in 4 years, auto sales lowest in 3 years. So it's again, Yogendra, I think the bigger question really for particularly the political opposition is, which I suppose in a sense includes you, is that how do you fight a force like the BJP, which despite having this kind of economic record can come back with 303 seats? How do you fight this?
Can I come in once?
I'll come back to you.
So I think
Vivek, Yogendra.
This is an equivalent of an innings. This is, as I was saying, in cricketing metaphors, this is equivalent of an innings defeat for the opposition. As is somewhat clear from all the commentators who have spoken, fortunately we have a kind of a consensus given the sheer structural advantage that the BJP had in terms of its organizational machine. Also, the narrative capture that the BJP had in this election, everything else was of a very small consequence, and that and also I should add the image of the Prime Minister. These three things left everything else to be completely insignificant. It could be anything. You are absolutely right. This presents now a huge challenge to the opposition. What we know is what won't work. Number one, a routine knee-jerk anti-Modism is counterproductive. We know that the language of caste community, so-called social justice against BJP's polarization won't work.
Okay.
And mere opposition unity, opposition for the sake of opposition unity won't work.
Okay,
opposition has to really think afresh.
What
and
will work?
People like me,
okay.
While Congress must answer, people like me also must answer. Why is it that the farmers did not vote as farmers?
Okay.
So we really need fresh positioning by opposition and a fresh rethink, just as the Labour Party did after 3 consecutive defeats by Mrs. Thatcher.
Okay, that's a bit general. Sanjay Kumar, do you think there are specific lessons here that the opposition can learn? And let me put it even more simply. Is the BJP beatable? And if so, how?
The question is very simple, but I think the answer or the way to beating BJP in 2024 is not going to be easy for the opposition. But I must say that there is no guarantee that it's not that a party cannot be defeated. When we were young, I was in school, I used to think that Congress can never be defeated, and look at what has happened to the Congress. Now when the students who are in the college, they may be having the same feeling about BJP, that nobody can defeat BJP. Who knows what is going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So it is, I won't say that BJP is not defeatable, but I know the task is very difficult for opposition.
Right.
The task of defeating BJP is not going to be very easy for Congress. So the difficult task, but yes, every party is defeatable.
No, I still haven't got a specific answer. You think the BJP is beatable?
No, of course.
And how? Because people in this election have stood up to them. I mean, Mamata Banerjee fought off an incredible amount of a very ferocious campaign, managed to somewhat hold her ground. Naveen Patnaik managed to hold his ground. So it's not that they're not beatable.
Look, let the premise be that nobody is invincible. So obviously the BJP can also be beatable and will be at some point. It will go down electorally as well.
Right.
But you know what the BJP has taught the other parties in this election is how to play to your strengths, and that's precisely what it has done on every count. It has ensured that the entire narrative that is pushed forth is what the BJP is comfortable with.
Right.
The opposition has, at the end of the day, ended up giving BJP a lot of things on the platter.
Right.
Even in terms of the identity issue, the BJP has again played to its strength. Its weakness in terms of castes was that there was many castes which were not under the BJP's umbrella. So
they've all come together.
They've all come together. It managed to remove identity from that point of view. However, retain identity when it comes to religion, because that is the BJP's strength. So really it has played to its strength.
Okay, Sheil, just very quickly in one line, is the BJP beatable and how? Suppose you're Rahul Gandhi, what would you do?
Well, I mean, it's easy, of course, to shoot at. It's easy to shoot at an ambulance, especially when the ambulance has crashed in a ditch. But there is a political culture within the Congress party that clearly has to go of centralization and nepotism and so forth.
Right.
And if you look at the Congress performance, it's actually not as bad as one thinks. You know, they still have 30-40% vote share in 118 seats, 40-50% vote share in 69 seats.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're not. But if you look at the states where the BJP performs better, it's where they have a ground organization. It's where they have recognizable political leadership. And to be true, where Rahul Gandhi did not campaign much. So
no, you're right.
I think
this is in some ways politics 101. Have a great ground game,
Exactly.
have workers in every booth, have strong state leaders.
Yeah.
Right.
Just be, 24/7. Do the Amit Shah playbook. And maybe you have a chance, but I don't see that happening.
look how Jagan carried the state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look at Jagan, look at Stalin.
Well, I think Vasu.
Vivek Reddy, are you beatable?
Yes, Vasu, I think.
Did he say yes?
You're saying yes?
I think the opposition needs to get a person like Modi, first of all. Second is,
where will they get? Can you lend him perhaps?
He must have. I think Modi's Yogyata is unique, and the people of India are fixated upon it. They like it.
Okay.
And that is what is competent politics today. That is good for India.
Okay. Well, that could start a whole new debate, but we're out of time.